This is Joe Moscato, the host of Joe Talk. Today, I was planning to give you something entertaining, something that kind of keep you glued to your seat. But what I'm going to do is do something different. I'm going to violate your calm. I'm going to spoil your beautiful sunny day in the park, chase away the squirrels. What I'm going to do is discuss something in the papers, on the street, on TV, something very pertinent and very serious. Talk about race and race relationships. A lot of people have been called to the show, and a lot of people haven't shown up. What I'm looking to get right now is a guest, eminent guest, Corinne Basabe. She's a TV producer. She's an educator. She's an artist. And she's the daughter of Roy Innis of CORE, formerly of CORE. Now, I'm just happy to introduce her. I'm happy she came. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on the show today. Thank you.
Now, how I came to the subject of race and decided to use it as my theme tonight, a lot of it went through my head and I said, well, this is current. And then a lot of negative things went through my head and says, where are my qualifications? What are my qualifications? But I realized so many people on TV, so many talking heads have been on TV, off TV, on radio, and what are their qualifications? When I listen to people, I sort of get the idea is that they may have a degree, they have some prominence in education, but really they don't know anything. They're not really on the street. Now, I'm on the street. I've lived a not particularly charmed life. I'm an artist, I'm a sculptor, I'm a photographer. I'm a draftsman. I worked as a letter carrier in the post office. I'm a union rep and a shop steward. I dealt with people of all races, all creeds, all nationalities. You know, I learned a lot, if not more qualified than the talking heads on television. Maybe I learned and got educated on the street. Maybe my street values are the same, maybe better than some of the people on TV. So I'm going to use the time either to blow my stack or to calm down and explain what I see and what I've experienced. Now, we're in the age of Corona, and that has knocked us on our tail. People have survived, people have been frightened, people have lost the balance, equilibrium, as far as their lives are concerned. And then what comes down the pike was George Floyd's killing in late May. Started off like a storm, a tornado, a hurricane. People were upset. People were actually mortified. The original videos I had seen were hazy and not very clear. Eventually, they came with the video, sharp, defined, with the cop's knee on Floyd's neck. That set off like a thunderstorm of activity, because you sense that, in a sense, this was murder, that the cop enjoyed, just pinning his neck to the ground. And this was something beyond what normally people describe as police brutality. It was, to my knowledge, or to my feeling, it was out and out murder. So people responded, people protested, people rioted, rioted out of anger, but also other people were involved with the rioting that had different motives. But it spread through the country, and things just piled on and piled on. And things that were hidden, things that were put aside for another day, festered, but then they just jumped out. So the people who kind of like couldn't accept what was happening, and they put it on the back burner, now everything was on the front burner. The fear of coronavirus, the fear of losing their job, the fear of all these multiple fears came out in frustration and anger. So kind of like trying to make sense of things, and how people relate to the situation and relate to their own personal situation. So that's kind of what I'd like to get at. There's no guarantee I'm going to give you an answer, or there's no guarantee I even have an answer myself. I'm unclear of what the answer is, but clear is that, hey, maybe I'll stick my nose in it. Maybe I'll have something to say. Maybe what I have to say is relevant. So I give it my best shot. What I do at this stage of the game is to turn to Corinne and ask her, as a Black educated woman, how is things that forefront in the news and TV affected her. Corinne, could you give me an answer, or attempt to give me some sort of answer? Is it a personal dilemma, or something that's been on your mind for a long time?
I think that I was greatly affected because I was already feeling anxiety about the coronavirus, and we were quarantined. So by the time we saw the George Floyd video, it was very emotional for me, and it was very, very traumatic. Because the corona for most Americans is just something about the virus, but if you're a person of color, or particularly a Black person, what's going on in terms of race is also impacting you. So we're having two separate experiences right now.
How does we'll say, race and your experience as a Black woman affected you? How do you think has it affected your, we'll say, career, affected your personal life, affected the way you think? Do you walk out as a Black woman? Do you walk down the street? Do you go to work? Has that affected your career? Do you feel it affected your advancement in your career?
Career-wise, I really can't say that race has affected me, because everything that I've set out to do in life, I basically have accomplished and do. I don't even think I just have done it. However, I think as a Black person, in the Black community, part of a family member of Black people, I think there is a residual trauma that exists in interpersonal relationships. I think there's definitely a psychological impact of the racial history of this country that affects particularly Black women in terms of our view of self. especially in my lifetime, we had to view ourselves as a Black woman, we had to view ourselves through the lens of white women in terms of our skin, our hair care, in terms of the way the world saw us, whether or not, in terms of our beauty standards were not measured on, an Afrocentric measuring stick. The measuring stick was basically how straight your hair could be, how light your skin could be. And that affected interpersonal relationships even between Black men and Black women, in terms of both of us thought beautiful hair was European hair, or skin was the lighter you are, the better you were. So, even in terms of, women hoping that their children would come out light skin, or that their nose would be more European. So it does affect us in terms of, it's creeped into Black culture in insidious ways. Also, I've had very bad experiences sometimes shopping in the city. You could be a nuclear scientist, you could have just cured cancer, but you walk into a high-end store and somebody's following you around. I had a horrible experience once. I was 59th Street, and I saw these beautiful outfits at Hugo Boss, and I said, I love style. Let me go in and look inside the store, and there was like security, as if the president was in the store with the headphones, as if the terrorist was in the store. So things like that impact me.
Now, your father was a trailblazer. He was a civil rights leader.
Mm-hmm.
How has that legacy also affected you?
It's affected me because he broke away from, I guess, the tradition of the 60s civil rights movement, and he became a conservative. And when I was in college, that was seen very negatively. And because people couldn't react to him, I feel like sometimes people reacted to me with a little bit of hostility, or being suspect. And so, it really depends. I think that, if you're a Black person who's somewhat a political moderate or conservative yourself, I think that it's seen as a good thing. But definitely, I think the majority of Black people are a Democrat, and basically, there's kind of a standard civil rights platform out there. So, it really varies. And I think my father could be credited for actually creating a platform for some of the Republicans or conservatives that are making names for themselves today. He was one of the first, among some of the first, who really took a lot of heat for that.
So there's always a divide. There's always people with different opinions, different ways of going. See, the whole idea, that the premise of even the theme of racism is that you have to bring it to the forefront. And when I had mentioned before, what the hell are my qualifications? Maybe qualifications are the fact that I'm willing to bring it forward. There's got to be a lot of talk, and a lot of talk about solutions, a lot of talk about policing. But again, from my viewpoint, and I've done a lot of conflict resolution in the post office with my union. I was a shop steward. I dealt with all kinds of folks, races, ethnic backgrounds. And that was my job. My job was to keep things in equilibrium and listen to people. And I think I succeeded. And again, all I could say is I try to listen, try to sort things out. Now, as far as a political game, now it's like impossible, because when you don't have the right information, you have all this misinformation and everything is totally unclear. Right now, we're going to have a commercial break, and I'll be back in a few minutes.
New York is the canary in the coal mine. What happens to New York is going to wind up happening in your city and in your community. We are going to fight every way we can to save every life that we can. We are all first responders. Your actions can either save or endanger a life. Job one has to be save lives. That has to be the priority.
Folks, we're back. Believe it or not, dive back in your seats, grab the can of beer, and settle in. Now, I would ask a lot of questions, and one question I would ask Corinne is how Trump and the way he acts has affected the people on the street and people's reaction to the crisis, the race crisis.
I think I think people, we live in New York City, so we see this country through urban lens, and we realize there's an upstate New York, there's small town America, there's the Midwest, there's down south, and not everybody sees things the same way. They're people who are intellectuals, they're people who are intellectuals and rank and file, they're intellectuals who are poets, they're artists, but they're also people who basically what I'm trying to say is that people with different points of view and different life experiences. And a lot of times, one of the reasons I think Trump won was that people underestimated his base. I've been shocked to go around the Bronx and realize that he has, supporters among, the average Blacks and Hispanics. So I don't take anything lightly. When I see certain, acts of violence, I definitely think that a lot of his dog whistling, a lot of his, name calling of China, his views towards Mexican families at the border, illegal immigrants, I think definitely has emboldened people who already, had those feelings deep inside. And I'm very suspicious of people who pretend to have a liberal agenda, but then go to the voting booth and vote differently. That's what we saw in the last election. So I don't really underestimate his support, because I think there's a lot of people who I would assume would not have supported Trump who do, and do so secretly.
I see a lot of young white demonstrators, not the rioters at night, but the demonstrators during the day. And I would say I was fascinated by the support that the Black Lives Matter have gotten from young whites, educated, college educated, or what. Do you think this is a game changer as far as race relations improving?
I'm very proud of the young Blacks and young whites. The young people are changing the world, and I think for the better. I think it takes a lot of courage. It's the first time the 60s would not have been successful if it wasn't for some of the white freedom writers as well. But definitely in this moment, I think, Blacks and Hispanics should not bear the full burden of civil rights and making this country live up to, the Constitution and what it was supposedly founded for. So I think that whites have a responsibility for making things better in this country. The burden just can't be on Blacks or Hispanics or other ethnic groups. Whites people have a responsibility to go to other whites and say, you know, we're not playing this game, or that, you know, that we want a different America, and that those white protesters are doing, you know, miraculous things, and many putting their life on the line.
Will Trump and the hateful speech and his actions, do you think would jeopardize the election or a free election in this country in November?
You know, you can't even make this stuff up. The thing with the you know, the post office, the mailbox, you know, you just can't make it. It's just it's it's frightening because there have been other, you know, times in history where we've seen, you know, similar behaviors. So yeah, I'm very nervous about November.
So November is a mystery, and we don't know how people react. Now, Trump is trying to kind of like rile people up and worry about, hey, you know, vote for me for law and order, vote for me to secure your lives. People are funny. How do people kind of react to that type of talk? And the thing that bothers me is that there are people, and we know people who are pro-Trump, who believe that he's sort of like the Messiah in a way. And I worried. And basically, I've always said that the election is a shoo-in, Biden is in, and everything is copacetic. But now I start to deny or to worry about, you know, what's going down the pike. The election will be held, the votes will be counted, but the poison and misinformation is driving me crazy. Now, I was a letter carrier, and I know what the post office is capable of. But when you try to sow the seeds of confusion and doubt, this is something, you know, beyond what I would normally consider to be, you know, justifiable. So I feel, and I don't know how you feel about it, because how it would affect the election, how it would affect the people. What do you see in the street, fear-wise or confusion-wise, that would make you doubt that you would have a decent, fair election?
Yes, I'm glad that you brought up the point about this law and order thing, because that strikes a chord with many people, and it's used over and over in a lot of elections. And I do have a concern that the Black Lives Matter movement do more to control their message, because the protests, you know, the world has deemed those protests as valid, and they've duplicated those protests all over the planet, all over the world. However, I do see an organized effort to divert the message of the protests into, you know, to, you know, violence and looting and you know, just chaos. And I do have a concern of the Black Lives movement being used to say, well, this country is out of control, and you in the suburbs, you know, look what they can do. So, I mean, one thing that was successful about the 1960s was that they really did a lot of, there was a lot of control in terms of how those marches and protests were conducted. You know, you see videos of people coming in, you know, dressed in these outfits to look like they're part of the protests, and, you know, breaking store windows. You see somebody here in New York right now you know, people assumed that it was, you know, you know, people from low income neighborhoods who were breaking the train windows, all the subways in the subway stations. But when you look at the video, he doesn't really fit the description, you know, of who, you know, the narrative of some of these news reports sounds one way, but then you see the video, you know, it's a tall white guy, muscular built tall white guy who's breaking all the windows. So there is a concerted effort to to make this country seem out of control. The bringing in of federal troops, you know, saying, you know, pressuring governors to bring in, you know, they allow the army to come in, you know, looking at the rise in gang warfare in the inner cities, to make, you know, to make this country seem unsafe. So, you know, so far this year has been like a one big science fiction movie. You know, I'm hoping it's not going to become like Fahrenheit 9/11.
So hopefully Biden would get elected, and hopefully the insanity would end to a certain extent, you know, soon after his election. The problem is that it takes time. People expect miracles. What you need from Biden is just to get the people together, get key people, Republicans and Democrats together, and kind of like, hey, forget about Trump. Trump is history. You need to get together. We need to, you know, get the country back on track. And for, you know, honest people to like get together and kind of like retake their own neighborhoods, boroughs, their cities. There's too many talking heads, too many politicians that I've seen that are taking advantage of the situation for their own reasons and rationales. The people in the center are really the people who have to step up. People have to live their lives and influence gatherers, people who can get people together. I'm very happy and honored and very thankful to have Corinne Innis Basabe on my show to add a little spice, a little common sense to sort of like my broken narrative. So thank you, Corinne, for coming.
Thank you for having me.